On March 3rd at around 11 o'clock in the morning, James Bonham, as well as possibly two other couriers, rode back into the Alamo with somewhat electrifying news. They had recently received a letter from Robert Williamson, also known as Three-Legged Willie. Of course, if you want to learn more about him, you can study him on your own time. But the letter promised that there would be 60 more men coming from the town of Gonzales. And on top of that, there would be 600 more men coming to relieve the beleaguered garrison. Well, of course, this news sounded too good to be true, and as we find out, it was. But in the postscript of the letter, Robert Williamson wrote that to Colonel Travis to hold out at all cost. But that very same day, a huge fanfare was to be made in the town of San Antonio when the reinforcements of Guamas Brigade came to aid Santa Anna's army. And so now Colonel Travis and the others realized that even if some of the volunteers were to make their way into the Alamo, the Mexican forces surrounding them would prove to be too much for the crumbling adobe mission. Now, realizing this, Colonel Travis that night sends out two Tejano women, one of whom was possibly Juana Navarro Osbury, a cousin of Jim Bowie, and they went to Santa Anna in order to try and get somewhat negotiable terms of surrender if Colonel Travis were to surrender the garrison to him. However, surrender does not interest Santa Anna, but he is interested in the intel that these women had for him, because now he realizes that the Alamo must be in a desperate position for Colonel Travis to make such an offer. Now, previously that morning, he had tried to hold a conference with his officers to plan an attack on the Alamo. But of course, that result of the conference was unconclusive because some of those held out, stating that they would rather wait for the larger artillery to come in so they could batter down the walls of the Alamo, as opposed to needlessly sacrificing the lives of their soldiers. But now, with this intelligence made known, Santa Anna determines that the final decision to be made on the assault will be made on March the 5th. The very next day, Santa Anna calls his officers together, and he tells them that we will make the assault on March the 6th. And so immediately, preparations began to be made. The bombardment intensified to keep the defenders' heads down as Santa Anna and his officers reconnoitered around the Alamo to find the best positions for river crossings or the best points of access to the Alamo. Now, it was in this time that Colonel Travis had another messenger or courier come into the Alamo, and he had a letter that stated that no one else was coming. How true is this? We don't really know, but what we do know is the ultimate legend that comes down to us from the siege of the Alamo, in which, towards one of the latter days, could have been a little bit earlier on, or possibly the last day, we know that Santa Anna Colonel Travis would have possibly drawn a line in the sand, or at the very least given an ultimatum to his men inside to either escape while they could get out, or to stay and fight it out with him. Whether or not Colonel Travis drew that line, it doesn't really matter much, because we know that at the end of the day, the majority of the garrison decided to stay and fight it out. But as evening approached, suddenly the bombardment fell eerily quiet, and silence reigned across the prairies surrounding the Alamo. The Mexican encampment begins to settle down. The soldiers start warming up in their bedrolls and preparing to get a decent sleep, because they know that in a few hours' time they will be called upon to do their duty. The men of the Alamo are eerily mistrusting of the quiet that surrounds the Alamo, because they had grown unaccustomed to it. But slowly but surely, the fatigue of this siege began to weigh on them, and one by one they fell asleep. Of course, each and every one of them would soon be awoken to the battle cries which would lead to the Battle of the Alamo on March the 6th.